Some of the historical background. Probably a lot of you wonder why on earth is it named the Burke-Gilman Trail? Some of our promotional efforts as we work to establish the trail. A key Interstate Commerce Commission ruling that impacted not only our trail but future trails. And some of the subsequent developments and some of our learnings as an organization. We came together in the summer. By the fall, we had organized as a group. By December, we had communicated with the Burlington Northern. And as you see, within 5 months, we already had the Burlington Northern and the city in conversation about the prospect of the right-of-way becoming a trail. So we wasted no time at all. We organized. We organized well. Initially, there were just about, 10 of us? And very quickly, our group grew with a lot of support. 4 of us rotated the chairmanship of the committee over the 6 years of creating the trail. We had people working on finance, government contacts, other contacts. You may recognize some of these people. Probably some of them were your neighbors. People who engaged with the media, people who engaged with the public and with the adjacent property owners, and of course membership. And over time, our ranks of membership swelled to thousands. On the left are some of the early supporting groups that worked with us. These people were all on board by about 6 months and helped us with our initial proposals to the city. Groups includes the View Ridge Community Council, Community Club, the Sierra Club, Cascade Cycling Club, North Cascades Conservation Council. And groups on the right joined further along the way. Mayor Ullman was a wonderful support right from the beginning. He was very supportive. At one point he said, "This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the people of Seattle and King County." And indeed, that kind of became our organizational mantra. It truly was a gift. And I'd like to turn it over to Estell, who will tell us some of the history of the railroad line and how it came to be the Burke-Gilman Trail.
So I need to tell you some things about local history. It's just in a very small window of time in the 1880s. And so I started with this slide because the name of that engine is the Thomas Burke, and the little railroad that had an engine for Gilman and for Yesler and for others as well. I need to tell you about the railroad that's in our neighborhood. As Sandy said, we started and we didn't know why that railroad was here. And we thought if we could find some history, we might learn how it happened to be here, and maybe that would help us in our project to change the railroad right of way to a trail. And so this book was particularly useful, and Merrill over there found out about it from somebody in the history people on campus. And it says a biography of Judge Burke, but he was so tied up with this little railroad that they even put a railroad on the cover. And these are some other books we used. The Bagley and the Hanford ones are the pretty early, closer to when this was all happening. And I want to point out that that word prophet is not misspelled. And that book is about our pioneers, and they came, go west young men, and they came here to make their fortune. So in 1875, Thomas Burke arrived in Seattle. He was 25 years old, and Seattle was 23 years old. And he had just passed the bar back in the Middle West, and friends said, go to Seattle, and Seattle quote, things are jumping. So he came to Seattle planning to start a frontier law practice, and it wasn't very long at all that he was well known in the community. And this is what he saw. This is Seattle in 1875. And he looked at this and saw a place that he could realize his vision. There were about 3,000 citizens at the time, and it grew rather fast to 5,000, I understand. Within a year, he was elected judge of the territorial probate court, so that's why he's referred to as Judge Burke. But he kind of enjoyed a little skirmish here now and then. And so he helped Seattle take on the Northern Pacific Railroad successfully. The Northern Pacific Railroad wanted to build the terminus for their line in Tacoma instead of Seattle, and our guys were here anticipating being the terminus. And nothing was at Commencement Bay yet. There's no one lived there. So Northern Pacific realized they could make even more money by developing their own town. And our city fathers were pretty angry about that. So now I wish to tell you quickly about Daniel Gilman. And he had a law practice in New York and kind of answered the same call, go west and see if you can make some money and find a place, find a home. And so he came to Seattle in 1883, 8 years after Burke. The thing to know about Daniel Gilman was he was the kind of guy that had connections. He kind of worked in the background, but around that time, Burke and Gilman met and became lifelong fast friends. Northern Pacific enters the picture. They really were serious about making the terminus in Tacoma, and our city fathers were, according to the PI, impatient. I have a hunch impatience an understatement. And then the PI wrote a series of articles, and that stirred up the local passion just in all corners of our little city. And the objections to Northern Pacific were expressed at a series of meetings. And at one meeting, Judge Burke said, quote, "The railroad is now in the hands of men who would sacrifice anything for private ends." The consensus from these meetings was to put an end to the Northern Pacific Railroad monopoly. And there was a lot of discussion about how to do that, and they decided that Seattle needed to build its own line. And this is 10 or 12 years later, we did make a railroad. You saw the city before. And the tracks that are on the right are the tracks for the Seattle Lake Shore and Eastern, which is our railroad. And it had the best spot because passengers didn't have to cross the tracks to get on the train. And you can maybe see in the corner here, the coal cars, and the coal is likely hauled down to the harbor here by the Seattle Lake Shore and Eastern. And this, I believe this spot is very close to where the ferry dock is now. And really the tracks don't look so different. Well, Judge Burke didn't want to lose any time, and he and Gilman got busy and drew up a prospectus and articles of incorporation for the new line. And he didn't stop there. He started collecting money locally. This is some of the incorporators. And all the names are known, the 12 incorporators. And Burke and Gilman are there. Judge Burke got busy and collected money from the local citizens. He got $500. And they sent Gilman right off on the $500 to go to the East Coast and find funding. Gilman actually only got to St. Paul, but he came back with some money. And it was enough to survey the first 5 miles. So in this map, red is where the tracks were heading, north to Canada to meet up with the Canadian Pacific Railway's transcontinental line that was already there. Since we were blocked on one side by water, on another side by mountains, and to the south by the Northern Pacific, they went north. But they keep thinking ahead, so they also went east. And they were heading for Spokane. They started their own railroad and thought it would just go everywhere they wanted. So here's some of our city fathers on an excursion on their little train. And this is near the north end of Lake Washington. And Burke and Gilman are pointed out with the arrows. And I think this is the Yesler engine that they were riding that day. They got a little further to Falls City. They could get logs here first. They were looking for revenue at home as well as in Wall Street. And they could also bring coal down, and there was also iron ores in the hills above Falls City on the way to Roslyn, kind of. But they were good at finding things to make revenue at home. The train could leave downtown Seattle and go to Ballard and then Latona and come to Yesler. And Yesler circled there. I think that's about where Urban Hort is now. And it's not a very long walk to the other red circle. And that spot has a pier, and you could take a steamer across Union Bay to Madison Park. At Madison Park, you could take a different steamer over to Kirkland and Houghton, or you could take the streetcar line back down Madison Street to Seattle, where they all lived. This is a couple of schedules they had for the train, and so I've circled in red 2 things to notice. Over here, you can see they were going to stop at Union Bay, Yesler, and Houghton, but they said special rates for excursions, picnics, and fishing parties. And so they could collect revenue however they thought. This schedule's a little later, and they said short and direct line to all points in British Columbia. They were near to the connection they attempted to make first. So this was a few years after this, and the Seattle Lakeshore and Eastern was about to be purchased by Northern Pacific. And Judge Burke said at a meeting, "The Northern Pacific has treated the little road with contempt, heaped ridicule upon it, sneered at it as a paper road, and the line was made out of wind." And after all that, we have a pivot point here in railroading on Puget Sound, and Northern Pacific seeks to control it, realizing the power it had. So they won over the big line by making our own little one. And Burke said, "The city of Seattle should always retain a warm place in its municipal heart for the little railway that came to its rescue in the darkest hours of Seattle's history and fought for Seattle and its commercial supremacy against all powerful odds." So that was Burke speaking. Now, we're going to fast forward pretty fast here to 1970. And besides reading this history and learning that our little railroad in our neighborhood maybe saved the city, we looked at ledgers in the basement of the courthouse, and we discovered that some of the properties were donated. That was an unexpected discovery. And so then the Pioneer National Title Insurance Company, we engaged them to help us a little bit, which they did without cost, to also search these deeds. And they found 22 deeds for us. So you can kind of see the list of the 22 on the side there, but we made larger a few, and the ones in red were donated. So people who were investing in land north of the city gave a piece of their property to help save our city. And sometimes it was 50 feet wide, sometimes it was 100 feet wide. So it wasn't a trivial gift. So then we got the idea, well, if our upright citizens donated land at the time to save our commercial possibilities, why can't Burlington Northern donate it back? I believe that the theme that the right-of-way was donated perhaps helped the city actually acquiring the right-of-way almost 100 years later. We had an opportunistic meeting with Mayor Oman, and this particular day in January of 1971, there was an environmental fair. It was located at the Seattle Center, and we were there for, this was our first attempt at anything like that, and I think we had a card table. We had some papers to hand out, and we had our thing that we were always trying to get signatures so we could reach kindred souls. We had that out. And I was manning the card table at this moment when Nancy Todd was with me, and she chose to go get us some coffee, and I saw a flurry on the other side of the room, and there was the mayor. And he had several of his staff with him, and he approached the first couple of displays, then he skipped 2 or 3, and then he approached someone, and the same thing around the room, and I'm standing there thinking, what am I going to do? I have to make the mayor talk to us. What to do? And then all of a sudden, as he's really pretty close, I knew. Under the card table was our sleeping 2-month-old. So I pushed him out in the way of the mayor. I didn't trip him. And if he was here, I dare say this. I wonder if he remembers this moment, but I sure do, because he stopped. And he said, "Who's this?" And it's a little girl that's going to need a bicycle trail. Explained about the... And he's okay, this is cute, she's cute, But then I explained about the right-of-way being abandoned, and then Nancy reappeared, and the two of us were able to talk to him for several minutes, more than anywhere else. And when we described the idea that a lot of the properties were donated, that got his attention. Wow. And so then he said he was really interested in this project, and he invited us to meet with him. And so we chose Jim Todd and Frank McChesney to go to the mayor's office and explain in more detail what we wanted. I think you've guessed by now how the Burke-Gilman Trail got its name, but here's my quick final mention of that. In our research, Judge Burke and Daniel Gilman appeared throughout, promoting their vision of Seattle, success of Seattle turning on the Seattle Lakeshore and Eastern Railway. They arrived finding little more than a village. The railway made the town into a thriving city, and now we preserve a portion of that right-of-way in their memory. So I will turn this over to Sandy. Thank you.
Many of you may not know that the Interstate Commerce Commission is the entity that has to approve all rail abandonments. So we very quickly approached the Interstate Commerce Commission. The city notified the Interstate Commerce Commission through Senator Magnuson about their interest in the commission's proceedings. And only 6 months after the beginning of all this effort, the Interstate Commerce Commission approved the Burlington Northern's abandonment request. However, they didn't tell the city until a full month later. Well, when the city found out, and we found out, and the Sierra Club found out, and 5 other groups found out, we petitioned the Interstate Commerce Commission regarding the abandonment to stay their proceedings and request an environmental impact statement. Now, environmental impact statements were a relatively new thing at that time, but it was a requirement that the Interstate Commerce Commission needed to abide by. So we made the request, and we waited 7 months. And the Interstate Commerce Commission did come out. They reopened the proceedings, disposition of the abandonment, reopened the proceedings, and issued an environmental impact statement that was less than 1 page long. Pathetically inadequate. If you see in the EIS reports today, they're often like a book. So in response, we and the city and the Sierra Club and other organizations immediately responded to this environmental impact statement with our own review of it, which in all cases was very extensive, particularly the cities. They did an excellent job. And along with this, with the help of the Sierra Club, who gave us free legal services, we filed what's called an amicus curiae brief, a friend of the court brief, with the Interstate Commerce Commission. That did 2 things. It was we were requesting in that brief that they consider more options than simply abandonment, but consider abandonment with conditions. So we filed that brief. And again, we didn't hear from them for 7 whole months. But by October of '72, the Interstate Commerce Commission revealed what we consider a precedent-setting ruling. The ruling stated that a public agency or civic group should be given first opportunity to purchase a right-of-way for use as public parkland. That opened the door, actually opened floodgates to the future of rail-to-trail conversions all across the country. Little do we know that at the time, but it's proven true.
One of our major goals was to gain support from the community and government officials. And so our job was to make handouts for not only the government people, but for all of the public. And this is one of the more sophisticated ones. We took some hikes on the trail as a group to show people what it looked like, and that went in all of our handouts. Here's a picture of us walking down the Burke-Gilman Trail. And then we had in this little brochure a map which showed the trail going up to Kenmore and the part that was going to be abandoned. And one thing you'll notice at that time, that Matthews Beach was the only park between the Arboretum and the north end. Kenmore didn't even have a park. You had to go all the way to Merrill. So we were completely lacking in parks. And since then, groups have gotten the Sandpoint Naval Station turned over into a beautiful park. Matthews Beach has expanded, and Kenmore, because the trail went through it, has also a very nice park there. There's a picture of us exploring the trail. On the left, you can see Inverness in the distance, and the street on the left. And on the right, you can see us approaching Matthews Beach area. And this particular picture was republished by the PI in their Sunday Northwest section. The other thing we did was we had this enormous mailing list, which we collected. So we asked people to write letters to not only us, but to the county executive at that time, John Spellman and Mayor Wes Elman, and Lois Merck from the Burlington Northerns. We wanted people to talk to their friends and spread the news, and especially talk to neighbors along the trail, and to get their names to send to us so we could begin to communicate. This is another one that came out when Sandy Wood was chair, and the City Council was about to vote on the trail. So we sent a hurried note out to them to please call all the City Council members by Monday before they vote in order to support the trail. Okay, here's an article from the PI. The PI was always very supportive of us and put out a lot of things that says Rails to Trails, and it starts with bicycling and hiking are fast becoming two of the new hallmarks of adult lifestyle in America. And that may seem kind of funny now. You see bikes everywhere thrown around the streets, but then there were very few bikes, and some people who I contacted told me, oh, this is just a fad, it's gonna go away. So, and then they went on to say that Seattle has the opportunity to acquire 11 miles of new biking and hiking trails. Burlington Northern has formally announced plans to abandon this sylvan stretch. The Burke-Gilman Park Committee recalls that much of the land for the original line was donated by Seattle settlers. The committee said that it was level, graded, wooded, and very attractive, and would integrate numerous parks together, which it did. And I'm going to read the last part. Acquisition of the right-of-way for this purpose would give Seattle an asset that would be everlasting envy of every major urban center in the nation, if not in the world. We were about between the second and the fifth Rails to Trails conversion in the country, and you heard from Sandy, we had a major precedent setting which helped many, many other groups to get the trail. I had a number of people who advised me. One was Margaret Tunks, who you may know from the R.H. Thompson Freeway, and I asked her for advice, and she said stopping's different than starting. I can't advise you, but she said you really have to work on it because people around us don't want the trail. And we didn't know that at the time, so it was nice to say, yes, push it. And then many times I went to see Mayor Ullman to contact him about where we were and what we were doing. And one time he very incisively said to me, you have to make a hike in. And he knew how to make it. He said you had to start at the north end and the south end and meet at Matthews Beach, and everybody would see masses of people who supported walking to Matthews Beach and could congregate at Matthews Beach. We got together as a group and again made committees. We had to make posters, handouts, flyers, brochures. We had to contact the newspaper and media, and this was really, really important. And then Estell and I were the phone crew to call all the people that Ruth Ittner had suggested. So among the things we had to do was to contact the police, that there would be a lot of traffic going on. We had to get a permit from the park department to have the rally at Matthews Beach. We had to alert them about having litter cans, and actually please would they give us a platform, which they did, and an audio system. We had to contact buses, the bus service, so that there would be bus service when people left. We printed many thousands of flyers to hand out. We called all the state representatives and senators in the area, the Attorney General, Governor Evans, and city council members, and we spent a lot of time talking to the Department of Parks. Here is the handout that we had. It says, "Come to the rally, join the hike-in, make a trail park." Burlington Northern is abandoning 11 miles of road. 85 years ago, private citizens donated the right-of-way in a public-spirited effort to help the city. Burlington Northern could redonate that land. Why? The hike-in and rally are to show the railroad the extent of public interest in requiring the right-of-way for a hike and biking trail park. When? Sunday, September 12th at noon, and everybody would meet along the way. And so we had the north end and the south end meeting places, and then gathering at Matthews Beach at 3 p.m. And Ullman and Spellman were going to speak. So come and bring your families, pick blackberries, bring your lunch. And at each point where you go, and so there are many more points on there where we knew there was parking and access to the trail, we had representatives who could help you start, and we were going to walk en masse, not as individuals, so you're to report to that person on the way. You may recognize some of these names. Frank Fickenstein had been president of the Mountaineers. Tom Hornbein, you know, climbed Everest, and we had representatives along the way picking up, even at Sheridan Beach. Senator John Wetzel was there, and King County Councilman Tracy Owen, and Mayor Wes Ullman started there. So here's a picture of people walking, and you can see that it's near Hawthorne Hills where the track is double. And so on the top left, that's walking to the hike-in. On the right, you can see what it looks like today. So here are people massing into Matthews Beach on the left top, and you can see them gathering on the bottom on the lawn there. And on the right, you can see what it looks like today going into Matthews Beach. And here's a picture of Ullman giving his talk. And you can see there are lots of people on the platform. All of the leaders who had led the hike were sitting up there. So Jim Todd recognized the supportive telegrams that we had from the governor, from Magnuson, Jackson, Representative Adams, Richte, who was executive director of the National Parks and Recreation, and O'Donnell from the Nature Resources. And Jim presented Ullman with a petition for the park trail signed by 1,600 people. So here it is after the park the next day. It says at the bottom, hundreds hike along the rail trails. This is what's below. Hundreds of men and women and children trekked the length of the woodsy right-of-way to demonstrate to Burlington Northern Railroad how much they would like the property donated for a hiking and biking trail. Hikers walked 5 miles from Kenmore and 6.3 miles from the freeway bridge to reach Matthews Beach. Ullman and Spellman were optimistic that they could work out a reasonable agreement with the Burlington Northerns. We had a large article also in the Wedgwood Star, and the important things that I want to read to you are that there are 3 groups. One group, perhaps the largest in number, wants the property to be donated to the city for a hiking biking trail. Second group, property owners, especially Sheridan Beach and Lake Forest Park, wish to purchase the property adjacent for their own property. That was a continuous thing we had to battle with. And a third group would like to retain the tracks and keep the railroad for pleasure, for the railroading for pleasure alive, and that was the Antique Railroad Society. And along the way, there were signs, and one in the Sheridan Beach area said, "Yield to private property owners. We don't walk through your neighborhood. Save our privacy." But there were others along the way that say, we bid thee welcome, friend. So this all came up in the newspaper. Ullman and Spellman spoke. They said, they both assured that the gathering estimated at more than 1,000, that they were hopeful the city would acquire the land for a nominal fee. And then it goes on to say that the railroad would not only talk to the city, the council, and the university, but they would listen to the property owners. So here is another PI article. It's proposed park lures backers and foes. And the day after, he wrote a letter to Jim Todd, and he commented that it was a magnificent success, the Sunday's hike-in. And I'm going to read a paragraph. Too often in recent years, demonstrations have had counterproductive results, alienating a broad majority of those whose support must be won for a cause to succeed. Sunday's march triumphed over both possible pitfalls. Those in attendance were happy and positive, with a genuine interest in solving the problems raised by the opponents to the proposed trail. Careful planning ensured that no unseen problems could arise to spoil the smooth progression of the activities of the day. The benefits. First, a large number of people throughout the Seattle area became familiar and involved in the most favorable way with our efforts to create a linear park. He always called it the interurban linear trail park concept. And the linear park for short. The vigorous show of support has strengthened our bargaining position with the railroad. No longer can it be alleged that this facility is desired by a small or homogeneous group. And then he went on to thank us for this.
So recall that this walk-in that Merrill described took place only 9 months after we began our efforts. So indeed, we were moving fast. So at this point, it was hard to believe it would take another 5 years to accomplish. By February of 1973, the city and the Burlington Northern had reached an agreement on the exchange of the railroad right-of-way for some underwater land downtown. So while it wasn't donated, we did kind of get a deal. And this was 2 years after we began our work. And then the mayor appointed a citizens advisory committee to recommend the use for the corridor. And that committee entertained proposals from the antique railroad folks. They entertained ideas about using the corridor for rapid transit, and of course our proposal for the trail, which was very well supported. And the outcome was that they did indeed recommend to the mayor that the corridor be used for a bicycle and pedestrian trail. A whole year later, we participated in the Northeast Pacific Street relocation project with the city and the University of Washington. The portion of the railway that went through campus was not on Burlington Northern land, it was on university land. And there were plans to relocate Pacific Street that threatened the continuity of the trail. So we worked to make sure that that trail stayed contiguous through campus there. And around the same time, the county was able to acquire the county portion of the Burke-Gilman Trail, the right-of-way. The city went ahead and paved a very small portion of the trail, and the park department, with I think about $9,000 in hand, printed up signs, but it was a whole month later when the city council approved the name. In the following winter and through the year, landscape design consultants were hired. Design standards for the trail were developed and submitted to the council for approval. And then finally, by the fall of 1976, the city had completed most portions of its segment of the Burke-Gilman Trail, and the county had completed its portion. And here's an article that was in one of the local papers, the Lake City Journal, saying, in 1887, they wanted it for trains. In 1977, the Burke-Gilman Trail is ready for bikes. But this was not the end of the story. The Burke-Gilman Trail went on to be connected to a very extensive King County trail system. You can go all the way up the Cedar River waterway from here. It also connected out to the west, all the way to Golden Gardens Park, with the exception of a small portion through Ballard that remains contentious to this day. And I have a guest, Karen Carrabine, from the Friends of the Burke-Gilman Trail, more recent organization that has been working for, gosh, how many years now, Kevin?
Almost 20.
Almost 20 years to resolve this missing link. So after our presentation, you'll hear briefly from Kevin. And here's an article just over a month ago in the paper, which you may have seen, about how the battle over that remaining missing link continues. Following the development of the trail, we discovered fairly quickly that the major objections that people had, some of the trailside residents, that their fears were appeased, that real estate values went up, not down, crime went down, not up, and that, as most of you know, being on the Burke-Gilman Trail is now a real estate asset. We discovered that the Interstate Commerce Commission ruling was resulting in new rail-to-trail developments all across the country. There are now 32,000 miles of rail-to-trail conversions across the country, another 8,000 under development, and 1,250 of those are in Washington State alone. So we're definitely a leader. In 1976, so this is right about the time that the Burke-Gilman Trail opened to the public, a federal act called the Railroad Revitalization and Regulatory Act was put into place. And this act contained a nice little nugget of gold, a demonstration grant for rail-to-trail conversions. And that funded the opening of 9 rail-to-trail conversions across the country, so to jumpstart the whole movement. It was a little late for the Burke-Gilman Trail, but we do have one trail in Washington, the Snoqualmie-Preston Trail, that was funded by that demonstration grant. And then another 10 years later, the Rails to Trails Conservancy, a national nonprofit organization, was founded to support rail-to-trail conversions across the country and to provide them with advice and to be sort of a gathering ground for all of the rail-to-trail conversion efforts across the country. And you can see they have quite a distinguished board there. So another thing I'd like to talk about briefly is what we learned as an organization. You know, at the time when we started out, we were a little group of young people in a neighborhood, excited about the project, had no idea that it would take us 6 years to accomplish what we set out to do. And we didn't have experience, we were just kind of blundering forward. But looking back, we discovered that we in fact had unwittingly followed a textbook recipe for effective social action. We focused on a clear goal, and we gave it a name and an identity right away. Even before we submitted our proposal to the city and to the Burlington Northern, we were calling it the Burke-Gilman Trail. We organized ourselves. We formed committees. You saw some of those. We built our membership. We easily found consensus. We reached out for support, especially to the trailside residents, and we proactively addressed our opponents' concerns. All along the way, we emphasized the positive, and we learned how to grow and corral our support until we had a cast of thousands. We contacted the appropriate government agencies and media, and we learned a lot about how governments work. We presented testimony at hearings, we wrote brochures and letters. We learned how to present our ideas with a very coherent message. And most of all, we showed, and I think this is a particularly important message in these times today, we showed that meaningful change can happen from the bottom up. It comes from the folks. And we discovered that the impacts of our work had implications and effects far beyond just the Burke-Gilman Trail. Talk about effective citizen action, a recent effort in Port Gamble to acquire a huge property, larger than Discovery Park, for public use. This is another one recently, the new park in Bothell. Citizens fought hard for that. These are a few pictures of the Burke-Gilman Trail today as it goes through the University of Washington, and some other views of the trail, our trail. So thank you. Kevin Carrabine will talk a little bit about he'll give us an update about the missing link.
So first of all, thank you to Estell and Merrill and Sandy for inviting me. I'm Kevin Carrabine. I'm a 30-year Ballard resident. I'm a nurse and a nurse practitioner that lived in Ballard, bicycle commuted, and because of gaps in the Burke-Gilman Trail, got involved in trying to continue the process that these women and hundreds of others, it sounds like, started. The things that those three did and their co-conspirators were exactly the kinds of things that both seem to work and have continued to work when it comes to trying to get things done, the ground up. I made a couple notes here. Mayors, so contacting mayors, contacting politicians, getting people to sign petitions, creating materials that get people interested in what you're trying to do has really seemed to work for us, the group that's called Friends of the Burke-Gilman Trail. And I think just taking some of this presentation and continuing to push it forward with our current political leaders is the thing that we hope will get the trail done. 1999, Friends of the Burke-Gilman Trail, which is a group of Ballard residents, probably half men, half women, looked at what was happening with the Burke-Gilman Trail and the final sections. Nothing was happening at that time. The trail, in 1996, City Council had decided to finish the trail from about 8th Northwest, which is right behind where Hale's Ales and near where the Fred Meyer is, to complete the trail out to Golden Gardens. The rail line continues to run there. It hooks up with the main line up near Golden Gardens. And because it was contentious due to many businesses along the route opposing it, the City Council said, let's build from 8th Northwest to 11th Northwest, which is where the large Fred Meyer store is now, near Leary. And then let's jump over the most contentious section and let's build the trail from the locks out to Golden Gardens. So for any of you who travel out to my part of the city, the northwest part of the city, you're aware there's a trail from the locks to Golden Gardens and a big gap, and then the trail goes up to 11th Avenue. So there's this discontinuous piece. So kind of consistent with what these organizers discovered, we decided we needed to give something a name that was catchy. So I'm proud to say that we are the group that coined the term the missing link about that section of trail, because it seemed like a nice hook to hang on this whole process. So beginning in 1999, we formed and we identified that we needed to get political leaders to get moving, because no one really wanted to touch this because there was contention and opposition, just like was faced by the organizers of the first sections. So now I'm going to jump through a really, really quick sequence of things that happened. We met with Mayor Paul Schell, 1999. He got on board and he said, he went out to a meeting of leaders in Ballard and said, we're going to build this trail, we're going to build it along the right of way. That sort of raised the opposition right then. He was unelected by Mayor Greg Nichols in 1999, I think it was. We then met with Mayor Greg Nichols, all of the city council members. We started collecting signatures and petitions. We actually hired a company to do a design for what a trail could look like through this section from 11th out to the locks. And ultimately, after Mayor Nichols commissioned the Seattle Department of Transportation to do a study, in 2003, he came out with his recommendation to complete the missing link along the rail right-of-way, ultimately, which has been the city's goal since back in the 80s, but to do it in interim and permanent sections. So they were going to build from 11th to the Ballard Bridge and then skip a section along Shilshole Avenue and then continue onward. Later that year, the city council endorsed that. And so then the next 2 or 3 years, the city spent collecting money to do it, federal money, state money, general funding money. They met with all the business owners along the rail right-of-way. They continued to do design work. And in 2009, finally, so this is 10 years after we formed as a group, and 6 years after the city council and the mayor said, yes, we're going to build this thing, they presented a plan, a design, the funding was in hand, the design was done. And speaking of environmental impact statements, they were required to do an environmental impact statement. They did a quick one that's called a checklist. Nowadays, and it was true then, people can appeal environmental impact statements. So in 2009, a group of businesses in Ballard along the rail right-of-way appealed the draft environmental impact statement, saying it was insufficient. Back and forth, 2009 up to 2013, there were legal back and forths. In the meantime, Mayor Nichols got elected out of office, and we elected Mayor Mike McGinn. He was supportive of the process. There was appeals at the Superior Court level, back to hearing examiners, Superior Court, and finally in 2013, McGinn said, we're not really going to be able to get this project done unless a full environmental impact statement is done to prove that this can be done in this real right-of-way. So 2015, 2016, culminating early this year, the city spent, I think, $1.5 million to produce a full environmental impact statement for completion of a 10-foot wide asphalt swath on city property. Yours was a single-page EIS. I have copies of the EIS at home. It's about this tall. It was the most extensive environmental impact statement the city had ever done, apparently, and certainly I would wager the most extensive environmental impact statement ever done for completion of a trail. The city presented that, and when you do an environmental impact statement, you come up with alternatives. You have a no-build alternative. What would happen if we didn't build a trail? And then they looked at multiple different routes and options for building the trail. And no surprise to us who've been advocating for this, or to any of the mayors, starting with Shell, then Nichols, then McGinn, and then Murray, everyone agreed that the place that the trail belonged was along the rail right-of-way. So in, I believe, January of last year, the city produced and published the final environmental impact statement. $1.5 million later, there was a 30-day appeal process. In the meantime, Mayor Murray set up what's called a design advisory committee to implement the design and completion of the trail. He invited and got stakeholders from business groups, from bicycle groups, walking groups, basically a wide range of interested individuals, including business owners along the trail, to sit down and from February until just about now to come up with a final design. Once the EIS is done, you then begin what's called design. 30% design, 60% design, 90% design. So for this last 9 months, this group, including business leaders, have been meeting with the city and with ESTOT to design a trail. They're about a month away from presenting this to the public. They've had multiple public meetings along the way. And probably in late January or February, they will present the final design. My wife and other members of our group have been part of that committee. And so we're very, very hopeful that once this is finally released, the city has the funding. This was the year that they were going to start construction, 2018. It's anticipated it will cost $12 to $15 million to do this because it involves significant sewer drainage and infrastructure work along much of the trail. The actual trail cost, I think, is around $3 million, but the infrastructure improvements are there. The bad news is that some of the same group of businesses who appealed back in 2003 have appealed the final environmental impact statement. And over the course of the last month, there have been multiple hearings down with what's called the Seattle hearing examiner. That hearing examiner now is digesting, and I went to the first meeting of this, digesting there was two carts, about 3 times as long as that. The top was filled, the bottom was filled with binders of information that the opponents were marshaling why the environmental impact statement was inadequate. At this phase of the process, the legal challenge to an EIS is, was it adequate? Did they adequately look at all the natural resources that might be changed, the noise, the traffic, etc.? So that appeal we'll probably hear later this month or early February, again from the hearing examiner. Those of us who are advocates fully expect that the opponents of the trail will appeal if the hearing examiner rules against them. That appeal goes to the King County Superior Court. If the Superior Court rules in favor of the city, none of the challenges in the past have gone beyond the Superior Court. There were attempts to appeal it to an appellate court, and a single judge apparently said, "No, we don't want to listen, or we don't want to hear this." The thing I will conclude with is that we've had 4 consecutive mayors, all of whom have been supportive of completing the trail in the rail right-of-way. It's been the city's idea since this first idea of a rails with trails got started to build it along the rail right-of-way. You as citizens, if you're voters, have voted with the various transportation levies we've had, a parks levy, all of which provided funding for and support for completing the trail along the rail right-of-way. Our current mayor, Mary Jenny Durkin, has not sort of revealed her hand, if you will, publicly about her view about whether to continue the process that her predecessor, Mayor Murray, started. She has not stopped the work of ESTOT or stopped the work of the Design Advisory Committee, but the finish of the Design Advisory Committee work is going to happen about the same time. The appeal process will come to its end, although it won't be the final bit of it. So we're just sort of waiting to hear what happens both with the appeal. We're confident about the Design Advisory Committee work, and the amount of work they've done with adjacent businesses to make sure that there's safe crossing for vehicles, that there's adequate warnings for trail users. And for those of you who have been out there, the section of trail we're talking about is very, very different than the Sylvan trail in the first 11 miles of it, and that's the challenge. I believe it can be done safely. It's city property. It's not taking property away from anyone. It's essentially building a 12-foot wide plus a little bit of a buffer transportation facility through this part of the city. So I think that's it. I guess I'll make the final plea. We have a website, Friends of the Burke-Gilman Trail. It's pretty rudimentary. You'll see some updates soon about stuff that's happening. If any of you are personal friends with Mayor Jenny Durkin or know people who are, I encourage you to pick up the phone and call her and say, Mayor Durkin, I heard about this missing link. And if you're in support of it, then tell her so. If you're not, then don't bother calling, I would say. No, we have to hear all sides. We've heard all sides over and over and over again. So, and the final thing I'll say is this was a tremendous presentation. I learned a lot I didn't know, and I think it was fantastic. So thank you again.